bottom, but we can do some informational items until Mr. Ross gets here, so we're going to proceed. We're going to skip item 1 for the moment, which is approve the minutes, and go to item 2, which is our September safety report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are 45 days since our last recordal. Pretty good track there with the 354 since our last lost time injury. So we had we had 0 injuries for September. That's 2 injuries year to date. Our incident rate right now is 3.5. Just for comparison, this time last year, six this time last year. So the 2 injuries is helping. Today's incident rate is 3.4. And that's only, I mean, this meeting came around quick. We only got 3,696 hours, I think is what it said. You can't see it. Into this month to help with the hours work. Something else, just we're on the track for the end of the year to be under a 3 with our incident rate. If we can keep this at 2 injuries until the end of the year. Just kind of as a comparison, in 15 at the end of the year we were 5.9. In 16 we were 9.4. 17 was 4.7. 18 5.9, and last year was 7.1. So we're doing pretty good. We're bringing it down, and we're keeping it down for a sustained period of time throughout the year. The training for September, we had a monthly safety meeting, again over some behavioral topics of identifying hazards and what can the employees do to do their part to stay safe. One of the things in this handout had to do with asking the question before you start work: what can hurt me today on the job? And it may be a bit morbid, but it gets you thinking and gets you aware of what's going on. And it starts the brain process of let me look at everything that's going on and try to identify what can hurt me. And then after we identify it, we've got to continue to take ownership and see through correcting hazards when we find them. Other than that, that's all I've got. So any questions? I clicked it. I hate to click it again because I don't want it to catch and change.
Any questions?
There we go.
Okay. Next on our list is personnel.
Thank you.
All right, starting with the personnel update. Good month. We didn't have any new hires and we didn't have any resignations. So our numbers stayed the same as far as full-time employees. Again, as we continue to move forward, looking at, filling some of these other positions, so as we get the right candidates, we'll bring them in.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, Mr. Ross, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'll give you just a few minutes to get set up. Can we go over the July, number 4, the July financial statement?
Yeah, we can just go over that,
Okay.
unfortunately. All right. How quickly y'all want to go over it? No. You can see this is year-to-date, and again, this number here includes our capital expenditures year-to-date as a cash out. So if you include the cash out flows of our capital expenditures, we've lost $2.6 million. When you go over to the breakdown per water, sewer, and electric, I mean, you can see the breakdown of the operating income per operation. You can see we've made so far year-to-date $728,000 in electric. We're just a little bit down on water, and then you see sewer, and you can see what is driving that number. And I think that we were all aware of that at the beginning of the year. That we were going to start doing capital expenditures associated with fixing our system. Okay, we've started to do that. I can tell you some of these monies will be recouped with the bond issue. City Council at their last meeting approved a resolution that allows us to go back anything that's been paid since July 5th forward under capital budgets will be able to be recouped through the bond issue once it's approved. That's 60 days prior to the date that was approved, the bond issue, that resolution was approved. There actually is some operating expenses. I've checked with our accountant, our auditors, and there will be some operating expenses associated with those projects that are currently in operating that I'm going to be able to move over into capital. It was actually the rental of equipment associated with those projects. It was the bypassing that we pay for directly to save us money. Instead of having it in the project, we pay for it directly. Those monies, since they were associated with the project and the construction of the project, I will be able to transfer those over to capital. I'm waiting, once I get all 3 months, because we did that for several months. We did it for July, August, and then what was paid in September. Once we get all the numbers gathered, we'll do a single JV. I already talked with Tori. We'll do a single JV and move those monies from operating to capital expenditure, so that then when we do the bond issue, we'll be able to recapture those monies. Okay. Just again, if you also look at revenue, you can see our revenue is down. I mean, a couple things that are associated with that is, again, we had a shutdown of a lot of businesses. Also, the natural gas prices were deflated again compared, I think, even at the beginning of the year. I was talking about this before the COVID happened. Natural gas prices drive energy prices. So they were down. If they're down, they drive the energy prices down. I think through the first 6 months of the year, the fuel adjustment was a negative number associated with our customers getting monies back on their bills, just because, again, energy prices are down. So that's why revenue is down. So the uptick on salaries and benefits, we hired some people in some departments last year. We had a lot of empty positions and we filled some voids. So that's where you see that number being larger than just a normal 2% number. It is because we hired and filled empty voids where we had budgeted, but this is actual expenditures, not budget. So the dollars were always budgeted. It's just you see the uptick in actual expenditures. Any other questions that stick out? And you can see also the direct reflection in our power purchase cost. I mean, 7 million to 5.6 million. So revenue's down. Y'all know me getting the power and getting it delivered is the largest items of the utility budget by far. That drives this department's budget. Any questions associated with that? This is by month, okay? You can see the positive and negative by month. This month right here, everybody goes, holy camola. That month right there, we had that trend typically every year, okay? And what that is the bills that are paid in June for power supply, I don't normally collect those monies until July, because retail sales is typically a month behind wholesale purchases, just because the way they work as far as, I'm reading, they don't line up exactly. So what ends up happening is when I get the summer warming and my usage goes way up, I pay for it, and then later my retail catches up a little bit. Okay, so my hope, and I almost say it's my hope, I typically see this trend, is typically in August or September, I will see a large uptick, because the opposite happens. I'm collecting monies from August, but I'm paying September bills. So that's what I hope to see. And I think I will. It's been like that for many years I've been here, so. Any questions concerning this? Other than, again, if you take out that $3.1 million of capital that we've already spent and moved it, it's not quite as onerous. Now, I can tell you from our audit, we typically, in the audit, depreciate about $2.4 million. So that's already $700,000 above, what we normally depreciate for the whole year. That's what the auditors depreciate. Even with that, though, it still does not make up for $700,000 on that number is still the wrong way.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you. I'd like to go back to the item number 1 and approve the minutes of the September the 10th meeting. Do we have a motion? Ms. Brown? Second? Mr. Ross, second. Are there any questions or changes? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, next we've got the approval of the bids for the 2020 manhole rehab, number 5.
How's everyone doing this morning?
All right.
All right, so, that's not working.
There. No, go back one. I hit the button twice. It's moving slow for some reason.
All right,
We all are.
It's been a long night.
so, the opening bids happened last week, and we took it to city council, and it got approved and referred back to the utilities. Just kind of give you a recap, what we're doing for the 2020 manhole rehab. The rehab includes replacing new frames and covers, doing lower 18th, which is the bottom, the structure of the manhole, putting a complete lining on it as far as like epoxy to basically have the structural integrity of the structure of that manhole. And then we're doing, let's see, lower 18s, the cone itself, we're doing some work on those. We have over 200 manholes that are going to get rehab, and we had one bidder for this project, and it was at $437,315. As you can see, we have over 8 contractors that picked up the plans, and only one showed up. So
We know lunch. Oh, no. It may be-
Yeah, they seemed interested until
We actually, the bid process was done by Fisher and Arnold. We have them reaching out to the contractors, asking why they didn't.
One of the reasons why I jump in is AED2 has been very busy in the last 2 years. There's currently at least 65 consent orders to cities across the state. So one of the reasons may be these contractors are very busy. Most of them are Arkansas-based contractors. And they pick and choose, but based on analysis of last year's bid prices, this bid is very competitive.
Do we have a motion to?
So moved.
Mr. Burns, second. Any questions, discussion? All those in favor of accepting the bid $437,315 from Upchurch Services? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And that's the math. That's the area that they're gonna be, the 200 manholes are being done in. That was, we did this study
Last year?
last year. So they did the evaluation, did the study, and this is the low-hanging fruit of fixing this problem, of the manholes first.
And the goal is to reduce inflow and infiltration.
So with last year's project and this year's project, how much more of the city do we need to do?
Manhole-wise, I'm gonna say we covered a large portion of it. What's next is the non-low-hanging fruit, which is the lines. And that's a little bit more expensive for I&I reduction. Dollars spent to I&I reduction captured is more expensive. Like y'all just approved the wood slip lining. That's what we're going to have to start looking at, is starting to do line replacement and slip lining of lines, and that gets, the dollars go up. That's why we're like, hey, let's get this taken care of first. You know, this is, I know we look at $450,000 and you go, that's low hanging fruit. But, you know, it is.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Okay, number 6, approval of bids for the 1500 kVA transformer. Todd?
Yep. All right. Okay, what was it? Okay. Y'all had in y'all's packet the bids. What this is we're replacing, we have a 1500 we only have one 1500 kVA transformer on our yard. We are needing a 1500 kVA transformer for the new West Junior High that is being built. You see the lead time, 16 to 18 weeks. So we went out for bids and got this proposals and asking that you approve the low bid of Arkansas Electric for $22,586. And again, what this is going to do is just fill the void of, once we take that one, put it over at the new West Junior High, we'll have another one on the yard, spare.
Okay, do we have a motion, questions?
That's a quick question. How many 1500 kVA bad mount transformers are in existence? Not spares, but do we have?
Yeah, I can't tell you an exact number of how many out in the field. That's one of the things I've talked to the superintendent is, I'm like, okay, how many spares do we need of this? But here's the thing, we have about 3 2500s, okay?
So you could use those. if you had-
Exactly. 2500s are the largest that we have out in the field. And so it's like, okay, we have these 3 2500s sitting here. If a 1500 blows up and then and I know your thought is, okay, if this one blows up and I put the spare there and then another one blows up, what do? Well, I've got 3 that I can quickly show over there.
Wait 4 months to fix it.
That's right. Plus, with our mutual aid agreement with all the other cities, if it's, an abnormal instance where we're, not, luckily, we're not on the coast dealing with what they're dealing with these days, and the other cities have spares, they've always been able to, hey, can I get this from you and I'll replace yours? So we've done that, and that's one of the good things of being part of that municipal organization.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept? Approve? Ms. Brown and second. Mr. Ross, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion passes.
All right. I'm gonna let the board talk about this one. No.
That's it. Well, I know Todd talked about how much money the utility has now and what kind of shape we're in, and I'm here to talk about $1 million project. This is at the flood pump station that's down close to the levee beside the sewage treatment plant. It was put into service in 1991, and it provides stormwater flood protection for the city. The arrangement ever since has been the city pays for the operation and maintenance of the facility, and the utility runs it. And when it was first built, the utility contributed $1 million to the cost of building it, with the thought that if you pump the water out, the streets aren't flooded and the water's not going into our sewer lines, worsening our economic problem. So it's in our interest, for many reasons, for that facility to be running. So it's been running almost 30 years, and it's time for some major repairs and upgrade to it. We brought some issues to you earlier this year. With the high groundwater, it's actually made some of the issues we're having down there worse, and have accelerated them. One being the discharge lines that go over the levee, they're 57 inches in diameter, are leaking. And the leaks are occurring at the pump station where the pipes come down. Now, they come off the levee so that you've got the weight of the pipe driving into the pump station, and there's a connection there to kind of absorb that force and to give the pipes a little bit of play, because everything, when you build something out there, everything moves. And if you've ever been on one of the bridges over the river in a traffic jam and you've actually had to sit there, that bridge is moving. Well, the pump station moves, not nearly that much. And what's happened over time is it's end of life for that connector. It's a coupling. And it's time to change it. And it's taken us a while to come up with a new design. The old design is no longer feasible. The coupling that was used, the company that provided it, that built it, that designed it, found out afterwards that they don't work really well on spiral wound pipe, and that's exactly the type of discharge line we have. So when we built it, it was an approved connector, and since then, usage has shown, it's not a good fit for it. It did last 30 years, so that wasn't too bad. But it's taken us about 3 months to come up with a replacement piece that had to be designed. And we've got that in hand now, and we've come up with a replacement procedure that we run past some engineers, and we've talked to Rob Rash at the levee board about. He's met us down there a couple of times, so he's well aware of what the problems are and the issues, and we're keeping him involved in it. So we need to do that work. The pond is pumped down for the first time in 2 years because of all the groundwater issues we've had and the rains. It's been hard to get ahead of it. And there's a lot of sand built up inside the station where the pumps pull up. And if we don't get that pulled out of there, we're going to have cavitation issues, which means the pumps are trying to suck up more water than can get into it. So that needs to be done. And we think one of the reasons there's so much sand there is that because of the leaks, we're making our own sand balls, where we're forcing water under pressure that's coming out of the discharge lines, the leaks, and it's going around the sides of the pump station and then coming up. And part of our repair procedure is to do, for lack of a better, radar penetration of the sides of the pump stations to see if we can locate any voids where the sand is coming from. If it had all been clay, we'd had different issues because clay swells when it gets wet. But this water movement, this is all backfill when the station was built, so it's sand, and some of the sand has been pumped out. So we want to address that issue, and then where we find these voids behind the concrete walls, we have a procedure where we can pump down this very expansive grout material that's got some strength to it, so we can fill the voids up. So doing all that work is going to cost about $450,000. Then, if you'll remember, back in the spring, because of the settlement caused by the sand being pumped out, the control building pretty much collapsed, and we had to tear it out. And we've got a wooden plywood building over it right now that is temporary, and we need to rebuild the control building. And what we've done as part of the design is look at moving, right now the building's on the side of the pump station. And we're looking at moving the building, when we rebuild it, onto the pump station. There's a big concrete apron where the pumps sit, and there's space in front of the pumps to place the building. So the building would be on solid foundation hereafter. Hopefully after we do the grout injections and fix the discharge lines, we won't have the issues, but while we're doing it, we're going to move the building over to solid on top of the station. To rebuild the building is about $150,000. And what we're going to do this time that's different from last time is we're going to make it environmentally controlled. The old control building was open to it was closed, but it was open to the weather in the sense that you had high humidity, you got cold, it got hot, dirt daubers got inside of it and built dirt nests around the controls. And with the upgrades that we're looking at for the controls, they need to be in the environmental controls. So this makes good sense anyway. We've got a lot of good use out of the building that we had. So this one will have heat and air conditioning in it. But that's just the building. The other, that's $150,000, so that brings the project up to about $600,000. Then the big unknown, which Todd is working on, since he's the electrical and I'm the civil, is evaluating the controls. How much of that, since they're over 30 years old, how much of them will survive moving over to the building? Some of that needs to be upgraded. Some of it will work perfectly well after we move it. So he's working with a third-party consultant who doesn't represent an engineering company, does not represent a vendor, who's going to come in, who's done this before, and say, you need to do this, you need to do that, this will come over. And we think that worst case, some of that is going to be an expensive upgrade if we need to do it. So what we are proposing is we do the work, And we'll be coming back asking for a waiving of competitive bidding once we have this lined out, because this is very specialized work, and the people we've been working with have gotten us to this point. And oh, and there's one other thing we have to do is, last year we had the pumps inspected by the manufacturer. They were able to inspect everything above ground. The base, the impeller of the pumps were still in the water, in the intake chambers, because the pond was, we couldn't keep it pumped down because of the groundwater. They got to come back and inspect the impellers and everything in the basin. So we've got to, that brings a team in from the contractors, and it'll take 2 or 3 days. So that's going to cost a little money. We got a little contingency in there in case pumps got to be pulled and sent back to the factory to get the impellers cleaned up and operated. So anyway, we're looking at a $1 million budget. We propose to, once we get everything finished, ask for the bids to be waived, to get the work done. We need to get this done before the rainy season sets in early next year, and we've got just enough time to get this done. And we front the cost of it, but ask the city to repay us $200,000 a year over the next 5 years, or whatever the final price is, but at that $200,000 a year rate to its reimbursed. So that's our plan to put it in as a final solution to what we've been talking about off and on for the last 6 months. Still a lot out there. Any questions? Any more information you'd like? Yes, sir.
All right, well, I just heard you say time is of the essence, but you just put it in a nutshell why the utilities is loaning the city $1 million instead of the other way around.
Utilities will, yeah, because the city's responsible for maintaining the pump station. And we're responsible for operating it. And we have the expertise to know what needs to be done. So this is what we're proposing to the city as the solution and the way to pay for it. Did I answer your question? Okay.
I mean, the utilities has the reserves currently to
We can put
financially come out and pay for this immediately. So we're able to pay in front of $1 million in financial assistance to the city, then that they will be able to budget over a period of time to pay us back. Again, a blessing to what we have is that we have the ability to, in an emergency, to front money and then collect that monies after the fact. Because of everybody that has done what they had done years and years ago. That's nothing we've done in the last year. That's been able to, I can tell you, Mr. Mayor William Johnson did that years ago when he financially turned this utilities around and built that capability within the utility. So our thought is we front the money. And again, we're going to city council. They're the ones that are going to be waiving the bidding and agreeing to actually spend the money, okay? Because the thought is that the city is still spending the money. It's just we're able to front the money where they're not taking that big general fund hit.
Something's already requested it.
Right. We no, it'll be on next week's city council agenda for them to approve the fixing of the discharge lines, okay? And that's at the roughly $450 dollars. What I am asking is that y'all allow it to be paid for by the utilities up front with the thought that then they pay us back over a period of time.
So that's the general agreement that you had in the past? Or is this
No,
agreement-
because the expenditures have not been this large. Previously, the city would always pay for it up front. But you're talking a difference of 30, some of these other repairs that have been done on pumps at these locations have always been paid for by the city at, $40,000, $50,000, not $1 million.
So did they come to us asking us to do this?
Yes,
or
they
we're just
did.
proposing it?
No, they asked.
Okay, and it's-
Tracy actually did. Tracy, who's here with us, he asked, hey, is it, because we sat down, we talked to them, and just currently in the limbo with the city financial, not having a full-time financial director. Tracy is the chairman of the budget committee for the city, and between him and Ms. Torrey, they've been kind of spearheading, trying to get everything. So we sat down with Tracy, and he said, hey, is this something, could y'all do this for us? And I said, I don't see why not. We have the reserves and are capable of paying for it, and they're saying, yes, we'll just pay it back over. So it doesn't hinder the general fund as much.
All right, is it with any interest or interest free?
I wouldn't charge interest. I think we're it's the same, in my opinion.
So how does this, what impact does this facility's performance have pertaining to the corrective actions and all that?
I can tell you, it has a great effect. It has a greater effect on people's flooding of their houses and the issues within the streets. But as Board pointed out at the very beginning, the longer that water's in the street, the more of it that's coming to us.
Exactly.
Me and Ward have talked about, we would like, there's a weir out there, and Ward knows about that weir. I wish that weir was there, because the quicker the water gets out of this city, the better it is for me on my sewer system.
Oh, sure.
That's one of the things that we'll be looking at. It's not something that'll be done immediately. And I've raised it with Rob Rash, that it's a fixed weir right now. We can't control it, but if we're exploring a design where it's a movable weir, and particularly during the summer and when the river's not up, there's no reason the weir couldn't be lowered. Because the reason the levee board wants that controlled is when the river's up, like it was here, they want some water in that pond, so there's not these sand bowls, and we don't want anything to happen to the levee, so we're on board with that.
Sure.
But it'd be nice to have the option, because it could drop the water level in the city by over a foot during a bad storm if the river's down. So, that's something else that we're looking at as part of this. Depending on how much is left over, we may come back and say, hey, this, and again, we'd have to get the levee board involved with that. So, like I said, I've raised it with Rob, and he's open to discussing it.
I did entertain just wondering if these improvements could have been included in, I reached out to Michael and asked him, could these improvements be included in the bond issue? And he referred it to legal is going to be our Friday, who does all our stuff. And he was like, no, that is not a normal expenditure that the utilities pays for. It's not in electric, water, sewers. That could not be, the funds that are generated from electric, water, sewer revenue can be used for. So that's why I said, okay. No, the lawyer said no, so I said, okay.
So we'd like your blessing to move forward with this.
Do we
So
have a
moved.
motion? Second? Okay, Mr. Burns, Ms. Brown. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we got number 8, approval to issue bonds for sewer improvement, automated metering infrastructure.
All right. Last month, y'all were given a handout of the potential, the options on our bond issue that we're going to be potentially or wanting to issue in February of next year. Okay. I brought Michael McBride. He's with Stevens, who has done our bond issues for as long as I've been here, and I don't think, you know, they did our 2009, they're very well respected. So I'm gonna, and I passed it out for y'all to review, but I didn't want to go over it because if y'all ask questions that I was really worried about Susan asking the question, then I go, I don't have a clue what you're asking. So I said, wait till next month. He had a prior arrangement that he I made it last month. So I'm gonna turn it over to him and let him go over it and just start moving forward. We have that last on the PowerPoint, and it looks like you actually have.
I always like handouts.
There you go.
I think it's, you can touch it, it makes it a little bit more real.
Here, if you want to, you go ahead. Tracy.
Well, thank you all for letting me come speak with you. Again, my name is Michael McBride. I'm with Stevens Inc. Out of Little Rock. As Kyle was saying, we've done a lot of work for the city. I work with West Memphis School District. I also work with Marion School District on assisting them with their bonds. And so what I want to do today is kind of walk you through the process, answer any questions you may potentially have. And really, so no, this isn't something you haven't dealt with in a number of years. I believe the last bond issue was in 2009. So my point in that is saying, if you have questions, stop me, let's work through them, because I really want this to be as informative as you need it to be to understand exactly what's happening. So if we can start on page 4, to me what you need to do is you really need to start, and these presentations, they're dated different months, but there's only minor things, so this will work. You got to start with the umbrella. You got to frame the conversation. And so that's what I have here for you on this assumptions page. And so what I have done is, from our conversations with your administration, to figure out what do you need in general terms, and then how can we execute that. And so that's what's outlined here for you on this page is, you know, the goal is to generate $30 million in construction funds up front, and then repay that over a set period of time. What we have started with is a set period of 20, 25, or 30 years, okay? It doesn't have to be those 3. It could be 21, it could be 19, it could be 10. It can't go much further than 30, but anything in between it could be. But we have to have a starting point for our conversation. And so 3 options to me always gives you a good place to start and then go forward from there. There'll be an optional redemption date assumed at this point to be about 10 years. That is when you can look at refinancing, paying off the loan, things of that nature. That's not set in stone. That's just a conservative starting point. I do want to say if you have extra money left over from your $30 million, you could redeem bonds early. But just for the nature of this, it is going to be a set period, and it's going to be important when determining the interest rates. We may be able to get away with a shorter call date, but that would be the optional redemption date on the contract between you and investors. I've used conservative estimates of today's interest rate environment. So don't hold me exactly to the rate, because what I did is I took today's rates and I added to it, because we're not going to be able to issue bonds for several months. And so I want to make sure we have good planning numbers, and that's what I've used in this presentation. We will have to get a third-party credit rating on this. Because this bond issue is going to be so large, we will need very large investors to be able to come in and purchase it. Those that, we'll obviously be able to get your local banks and your local investors involved, but when you're trying to move $30 million plus in bonds, you're going to need like a State Farm or an Aflac, these large companies that really need a lot of this type of product. And they're going to want a third-party credit analysis, and that's what we'll have to get, and we've assumed an A rating. I think that's very conservative for what your financials look like as of the last audit. You will also have additional covenants when you issue bonds, and you had these in 2009. These are things that you pledge to investors that you will do. These covenants I have assumed have been 1.1 times. So in other words, if your revenues fall below 1.1 times your payment, you would have to increase rates. You're currently well above that. This is about the floor that people will allow to actually purchase the bonds. And if you want to issue additional bonds, you'd have to meet these other requirements as well. We've assumed that your revenues available for a payment is $4,008,040. That's off of your 2019 audit. So now hearing, your financial update, these numbers could change, obviously. So the big key in all of this will be when we can get audited financials, when we can get a third party to look at what your numbers look like at the end of the year, to be able to give that to investors. You will also need to fund a debt service reserve as you did last time you issued bonds. This is a rainy day fund. This is a marketing technique. This is set aside in case revenues were to fall below payment. Before the pandemic, we probably didn't need this, but people are sitting there, because for years and years it was like, well, no one's ever used the debt service reserve. Why do we even have it? And then something like a pandemic happens where revenues across the board fall so dramatically that now investors are saying, we need this before we really get comfortable with purchasing these bonds. We have assumed that you will be able to have money in hand by the end of February. 2/25/21 is when we're assuming you have money in hand. Everything goes smoothly. The biggest hold up in all this, and we've already started conversations to make sure this moves smoothly, is when we can get financials that are looked at by ground. That's going to be what investors are going to want to see before they're willing to buy the bonds. Does that make sense? So these are all the inputs. This is everything that we have assumed. I could be incorrect on some of these. Some of these things could change, and those would slightly change the output. But for now, I'm very confident in everything we've put in here and all the assumptions that have been made. If you turn to page 5, as I discussed, you'll see these three options that I have stated. So everything that we just put in, just think of it as a big, word math problem, right? Here's the output. On a 20, 25, and 30-year repayment term, option 1, 2, and 3, to generate $30 million on each, your estimated annual payment would be as such. $1,946,000 on the 20-year option, $1,007,000 on the 25, and $1,006,000, we'll call it, on the 30-year. You can then see the total repayment back. So obviously, if you go shorter, your annual payment is going to be higher because you're not amortizing the debt over a further period of time. But you'll save long-term on your interest expense. $42,300,000 on option 2. Again, same thing here. We've gone out a little bit further. So it may be a little bit easier on the cash flow, but you need to weigh that option of what's the overall repayment of the loan, and then obviously option 3 there as well. Best on your cash flow, but long-term you're going to pay more interest. These are the assumed interest rates I have used. So for the 20-year option, we've assumed a 2.16, 2.5 for the 25, and 2.74 on the 30-year option, which should let you know where interest rates are currently. They're at historic lows. I'm assuming, at least from everything that is being said from the Fed at this point, the Federal Reserve Bank, that interest rates should stay low for the foreseeable future. That could change, obviously, in November when we have a presidential election, one way or the other. We're not exactly sure how the market is going to react to either outcome, just because of the level of uncertainty that is going into the election. Say all that to say, even if rates were to go up, I have put some cushion in here on these numbers. On the 216, as I stated earlier, conservative estimates. So hopefully, even if rates go up slightly, we're still within these levels and these still make sense. If the interest rate input goes up, obviously your annual payment would go up because your interest expense would go up. The other output you could change, the other input you could change is the construction amount. If you don't need exactly $30 million, you could always issue less than that. If your financials come back from the auditor and they are as such where we cannot mathematically afford the payment, in other words, an investor's going to pick up, they're going to look at your audit, and they're going to say, okay, here's how much money is available for you to repay this debt. They're not going to want that number to be 1-to-1. Just like if you go down to the bank and you say, I want to get a home loan, they're going to say, give me your last couple pay stubs, and they're going to say, all right, well, your mortgage payment cannot be exactly what you're bringing in every month. They're going to want it to be less. Same thing with bond investors here. So we'll have to do an analysis when we see your 2020 numbers on what you can actually afford. And so if that number is such that we need to reduce that payment, we can always reduce the construction amount. Is that clear? So there are a lot of these variables that can change, but what we're trying to get you, or what I'm trying to really get you to understand is there is a certain way you could do this. Are you more interested in cash flow, which would be stretching this out longer in an interest rate environment that is extremely low? Or are you more interested in trying to amortize the debt quickly and have the lowest repayment in total? And that's kind of what you're looking at here. Most utilities are going to go in the 25 to 30-year range. And that is because what they're putting in the ground has an extremely long useful life. And when I say useful life, I'm using it more as the accounting term. In other words, the pipes you're putting in the ground, the pumps you're installing, those things are going to last 20, 30, 40 years. And so amortizing the debt over that length is acceptable because what you're getting is actually, will be around for the time you're having the debt outstanding. In other words, you're not going out and buy a bunch of trucks that are going to be gone in 5 years and you're still paying on the note for 30 years. In this scenario, you would be putting infrastructure in that would be lasting for a length of time. So it's all about the difference between cash flow and the repayment and figuring out where you want to land on that information. Yes, sir.
So, once the term is selected, if there are funds to pay it off early, are there penalties for that?
Now, once you get past that 10-year repayment term, or the 10-year optional redemption date, there is no penalty at all. If you have excess construction funds left over, you do not have to wait till the 10-year. You can pay those off at any point. And I don't believe we'll have to stick with the 10-year. It's going to depend. If you go 20 years, we won't have a 10-year repayment, or optional redemption. That will shorten up. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's what you want. In today's interest rate environment, with rates being extremely low, and this is kind of getting in the weeds, so if this doesn't make sense, stop me. Interest rates are extremely low. So what investors want is what we refer to as coupon protection. In other words, they want the physical bond to have a higher interest rate printed on it, say a 4 or 5%. You'll see these in some of these numbers. But they're willing to pay more than the face value of the bond. We call it buying it at a premium. So they're spending $110 to get $100 in bonds because they want that thing to say 5%. Their net effect, because at the end of the day, they bought $100 for $110, and they get $100 back. That net effect to them is the yield, which is a lower interest rate, which is their. So I say all that to say, when you're pricing a bond issue and you're selling it at a premium, because rates are so low, there's quite a bit of premium in these bonds, you price it to the call date. And the reason that is because it's assumed that when that call date comes up, most people will call the bonds. In a normal interest rate environment, you sold a 30-year bond issue, now it's a 20-year. Even if rates have gone up slightly, you're selling a shorter bond issue, you can normally refinance it, save some money. You have additional projects, you extend it out. So the shorter that call date is, the worse interest rate you get from investors. Does that make sense? And it's because of how interest rates are and how it's priced. So you could put a 2-year call on this. You could. It would cost you interest because investors would say, well, if I only know I've got it for 2 years, I'm going to require a higher interest rate. So the 10-year is conservative. We may be able to get away with a 7. Interest rates may change between now and when we can issue bonds, and we can go 5. So it's really all what you want. But once you get to that point, there is no penalty for repayment. And if there are extra construction funds, there is no penalty for repayment early. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Absolutely. That gives you a really good overview. I have for you, again, numbers that back up what are in these 3 boxes on 6, 7, and 8. You know, you can see there the coupon and how I'm talking about, you know, I'm showing you an interest rate of, you know, 2.16, but I'm showing you coupons of 5%. Again, that's because people are paying more than the face value. There is a timeline for you. If you move all the way, if you will move to page 9. I guess I moved it up on this presentation. I've got it on 9, but here's the timeline, and again, I've made slight alterations in this presentation, but because we've already had the city council adopt the reimbursement resolution, which is what we were talking about earlier, where you can pay yourself back from expenditures actually 60 days prior to that date from funds that come in from the bond issue. Obviously today we're sitting here discussing, trying to get kind of an understanding of which direction you would like to go. And then here are the steps. We would begin preparing documents, November, December, probably a little bit earlier than this timeline outlines. But what is key here is we're going to have to receive financials from your auditor. As soon as we have that, we're a go. But we can't really move forward until we have that, because investors, especially in today's environment, are not going to want to move forward with purchasing these bonds until they have a really good understanding of how you look financially. You know, how has the pandemic affected you? What do things look like? And so once we get those, then we're moving pretty quickly. You know, we'll have to get that third-party credit rating, which is, discussed here. We'll receive indication on that. We'll release the document to investors. Our sales force will get out there and pre-market it. We'll come back to you and discuss where we think interest rate levels are prior to the sale. Obviously, we'll keep you updated on interest rates moving forward, but there's a pricing meeting here you can see on the 20th, which is where we are really saying, here's what we're going out with tomorrow. Here's what where is the rubber meets the road of what people are willing to buy to what we can sell. We would price the bond issue. We would lock in interest rates that morning. We'd come in front of the city council. They would adopt all the appropriate ordinances to complete the bond issue. There's a 30-day referendum period. That's a state law where there can be a contest period, though we've never seen that occur. So you'd have 30 days between interest rates locking in, it would not change, and the bond issue closing, and you having money in hand. So that's the timeline and how things would move. Again, the key here is financials, when we can get financials, and when we can get something put together for investors that they're comfortable with, that we can proceed forward with. We can get out there and market and sell the bonds.
Questions from Michael? I would like a motion is basically what I'm asking for is, I might state this wrong, Michael, so correct me. What I'm asking for is approval to do a bond issue for $30 million to get $30 million in construction funds with a payment and not to exceed $1.6 million annually for the purposes of sewer improvements, water improvements, and I also put on here AMI infrastructure, okay? I'd like to leave that flexibility. I'll be bringing to y'all the budget next month, and we'll be presenting to y'all our findings from, y'all gave me approval last year to start an RP. We got proposals back, and again, how everything happened, and when COVID hit, that kind of went and just petered on down. We just have recently met, we narrowed it down. We are going to be visiting the vendor that we think is the best fit for us on that particular project. But we're going to be coming to y'all and giving you a presentation next month on that, along with the budget for 2021. But I would like to get approval for the spending. If it ends up getting turned down, we don't include it. If that project gets turned down, then we just don't include it in the bond issue. But right now, to give him some direction, that's what I'm wanting, is the original $30 million in construction with not to exceed a $1.6 million annual payback. And that allows him to do what he needs to do. And the reason originally when me and Frank were talking about doing this, we were originally looking at doing a smaller bond issue and paying for some of this out of reserves. With the current interest rates where they're at, I think, we'll be better suited to go ahead and issue bonds. Because again, we're redoing our wastewater treatment facility plant. That's the largest portion of these dollars, is that wastewater treatment plant. That plant will be serving this community for the next 40 years. So, as he said, these construction projects, as you know, these pipes in the grounds that we're fixing and we're doing repairs there, they've been there longer than I've been alive. So, and I'm older than most people.
Todd, where did you get the 1.6 million?
Based on, I will also be bringing to y'all what we went through on the budget, the rate amendments to water and sewer, of where I'll be in 4 years. And what I've been, as y'all know, we've been subsidizing, the electric revenue subsidizes our water and sewer. Where that got me is, okay, I've got an electric contract, okay, that is out 5 years, okay? I know that I've got that fixed price. I know I'm going to be able to continue to help subsidize from electric to water and sewer as I raise water and sewer rates up to a level. If something catastrophic happens with energy prices, my hope is to get water and sewer closer to being self-sufficient, so that if I get a higher wholesale price in my next contract, I don't have to raise those rates. It'll be able to be, and if you saw, that's what Ward presented. If you look out those years, that's about where we're at. We're getting there. So that's where my number came from. I know that.
So 1.6 would put us, based on the chart, somewhere between 25 and 30 years, depending on what the interest rate actually ends up being.
Yeah, and that's the one point I just want to make. So if interest rates increase to the point where even going 30 years at a 1.6 payment, we may have to decrease to 30 million.
Okay.
So if rates go up, and we're saying 1.6 is all we want to pay, all I can change is the construction amount. I just want to make that very clear. Conversely, if rates were to stay the same or were to go down, I could go shorter. I could do a 28-year financing or 29-year financing. It would just depend on what rates were. Rates stay exactly the same, we do probably a 30-year, because I imagine if you went to 29, it would push that above. It's going to alter quite a bit, even for 1 year. But you'd probably keep it at 30 and you'd just be a little bit to the good on your budget. But I just do want to make that very, very clear. If rates are to go up between now and when we can lock in interest rates, what will have to go down if we exceed that 1.6 is that 30 million. Okay? And the other thing too is if your audited financials for 2020 come back and there is not sufficient revenues, because you have had a lot of expenditures this year and revenues, revenues are down, we may have to not go to the full 1.6 as well. And And if that's the case, then you can look at coming back next year when you have new numbers and they're not affected by the pandemic, you complete the project. Is that clear? I don't want to tell you something can absolutely be done and there are variables in there that I don't know.
Based on what he is saying, would you rather us approve a $30 million bond issue without putting the limitations on your 1.6?
The only issue
Because
is-
you are limiting
Yeah,
yourself. And you still have to construct it, whether we
Right.
have to go up on rates or not.
Right. I think I would rather it be, instead of a 30 million, I'd rather be not to exceed 1.6 annual, okay?
What about up to a $30 million bond issue, and then you can play with it? I just hate to back you into.
And I agree, that's what I was trying not to do, and he just threw it away. He threw it in there as hell, I should back myself, still back myself into the point. I'm being positive that it won't go up.
Well, but it will give you the opportunity to just not sell as many when you get to that point because of the 1.6, which is what, you get that decision before you pull the trigger and actually sell them.
Okay,
How many you're going to
I'm
sell.
good with that.
So up
Do
to
you think that's a
30
better way of
million,
doing it,
and then you
Michael?
work on
Well,
that price.
It gives you the most flexibility. My concern is you need to be comfortable with what you can pay annually.
Right.
And at a certain point, if you can't pay, 1.6 might be a figure that you can get comfortable with. Is it 1.7? Is it 1.8? That's what you really, because at the end of the day, if you can't afford it and we can only get $28 million and you have to take maybe $2 million out of reserves, you're obviously accomplishing your goals.
Right.
So really, I think what Susan is saying is correct, but we also need a good understanding of what you can really afford.
Right.
And if it's no more than 1.6, then your payment does not need to be more than 1.6, and I think we know that, and so that would be my only problem. This way we give you the most flexibility,
Okay.
but at the end of the day, we don't need to issue bonds that you can't afford to pay back.
Right. And I'm good with what you suggested, getting that, but giving us the flexibility to,
Not
Do-
to exceed 30 million.
Right.
You work with where
correct,
your numbers give you.
correct. I'm good with that. Again, because if we have to, I can still pay out of reserves to get us down to whatever, to make sure our annual payment is not, where it is. Because again, I don't know where these bids are gonna come in at. That's the key. It's all, hey, here's a budgetary number. Did we cushion them high? Or are they, over time gonna come in? That's, it's all, as you said, based on that. So I'm good with doing what you suggested, changing that to just,
Or no payment amount.
at this time,
You're just looking for a total
yeah, total bond issue.
bond issue, big
Yeah.
value.
I can tell you, I am looking at that number though. I can tell you, I'm looking at that number knowing that I know what I can pay and what I can't pay. And, what I can absorb across all three of my, operations, electric, water, and sewer, what they're bringing in. And, again, I know, well,
Okay, do we have a motion for that?
I'll make a
Issue bonds
motion.
not to exceed 30 million?
Not to exceed 30 million, a payment for. How do you word that?
I would say just not to exceed 30
Well,
million.
and I would say 30 million in construction, because remember, there's going to be a debt service reserve, there's going to be cost of issuance, we're going to roll it all in there. So 30 million and not to exceed 30 million
in construction.
in construction.
Those words probably need to be, that's,
Well, and the city has already actually authorized a not to exceed amount.
right,
Um,
32 million, because it included the premium.
We look at the premium and everything, and we try to back into that number. And so, and to say exactly 30 million, like in a perfect world, I'm off on some of my numbers, you get a little rounding, and you actually end up with like 30 million, $20,000, and that's always to the good. So to say it's like a hard cap is also sort of an issue as well. I mean, you could say, you know, not to exceed the amount that was approved by the city council, and I think you'd be in great shape, because what they approved is the $30 million in construction, but really what they're looking at is the total repayment. And we ran the or the total par amount of the bonds, and we ran the calculation on that.
Okay, so you want us to say not to exceed
It was, and I can
30
pull that,
million in construction.
yes. I think the construction total is what we need to be concerned about. And so giving us some flexibility.
To me, that's two different, to approve 30 million in construction versus approving 30 million in
in
bonds
bonds.
are two different motions.
Yes, yes. 30 million in construction is different than a $30 million bond issue.
Mhm. And you're asking
For the
a
construction.
bond. on
Yes.
Construction.
Well, the construction amount in the bond issue would not exceed
30 million.
30 million.
Okay.
So,
I know that's a,
She has to write it down and get it, the wording.
let's make a motion to approve a bond issue for up to $30 million in construction. Is that what you're looking, does that fit?
yeah.
Sounds good to me. I'm gonna refer to the guy right there.
But I mean, the wording is.
I know, it's very important, I agree.
Exactly, so.
That's why I keep saying I'm gonna refer to him.
We want everybody to understand.
Right.
This is more money than any of us has ever seen.
Yeah, I agree.
So is that a motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second? Sorry. Do we have any discussion? Okay, all those in favor for a 30 million, total of 30 million in construction
For a bond issue.
for a bond issue for
To a
30
total,
million?
or not to exceed 30 million.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. You got it.
Thank you
Now
for
she
your time.
has to write it.
All right, this is kind of following up again. Next month, we'll be doing budget for next year. I'll have that in front of y'all. I hope to have a ordinance of some type of potential sewer and water rate increases next month. And we'll also be having a presentation on this AMI project. So, again, following on some other good things. As you can tell, they're finishing up at Woods. Finally, they poured the last slab of the areas. So Woods and Jefferson is completely fixed. It's still not open because they had the areas north of there, they had to go and do the other sinkhole we had out in Woods where they had tore it up. They just finished pouring the concrete yesterday, but that concrete needs to sit for about 7 days before we start letting 18-wheelers on it. So all those major projects we had are completed. We had another sinkhole pop up on us about a month ago, right behind First Baptist Church of West Memphis. We've got same company, they went from there straight over to there. That sewer line though is about 8 feet deep, 9 feet deep, and it's about 10 feet away from their building. Years ago, they allowed them to build right next to that line. And so it's a very tight, they're actually up under a canopy working also. So, but it's a smaller, less used line, but that line goes straight up that alleyway behind Missouri Street businesses and captures all the businesses all the way up to the bayou. So they're still working on that, and hopefully though here soon we'll get that completed. I think Winchell was fixed earlier this week. Once we were able to get Woods and Jefferson and get that water from being surcharged on that sewer line, our guys went in and found the issue and fixed it. So we were able to do that in-house. So that's been fixed over there. Again, that's About all I got, that's enough.
Need a break, don't
So, any questions, anything in general? I think that's it.
you? Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I made a motion, we did,
Or do we have a second? Ms. Burns, second. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.